Yes, I can hear.
Okay, good, getting there. George Munoz? George, can you hear us? George Munoz? Can you hear us? No, is George? We've got to keep it to below 15 in the room, and I think we're still there. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're doing okay. Let's jump in. This is unusual times we're in. The meeting of the 11th Judicial District Court Judicial Nominating Commission is now in order. Thank you all for your patience as we deal with an unprecedented situation. I first want to start by thanking Tony Anderson, Beverly Aiken, sitting here, the IT staff of the court, all the people who've been working to try and deal with this fluctuating situation. All right, this meeting is being held pursuant to public notice which was provided on February 6, 2020. My name is Sergio Pareja, Dean of the University of New Mexico School of Law. By New Mexico Constitution, the Dean of the School of Law is charged with the responsibility of serving as chair of judicial nominating commissions. I do not vote except to break a tie. Shortly, I will ask the members of the panel to take the oath of office prescribed by the New Mexico Constitution, which requires each person serving on this judicial nominating commission to pledge to faithfully and impartially discharge duties of the office of the commissioner. Please allow me to briefly describe the meaning of impartiality in this setting. According to the Handbook for Judicial Nominating Commissioners, written by the American Judicature Society, commissioners should be aware of their own points of view, those of fellow commission members, and those inherent in the evaluative criteria they use. By maintaining an awareness of prejudices, commissioners will be able to avoid biased results. So in essence, impartiality for judicial nominating commissions means a willingness to be open-minded and objective. I understand New Mexico, the legal community in this state is small, so previous knowledge of an applicant is not a reason for disqualification. However, what you have to do is disclose if you have any current or past professional, family, business, or other special relationship with the candidate. So what I'll do, I think, in this unique circumstance, I'll probably go around the table, having everybody introduce themselves. At that point in time, you would, and around the table, and then I'll go through my list of names of the people on the screen or on the phone. At that time, introduce yourself, state who appointed you to this commission, and whether you have any special relationship with either of the applicants, and whether you can be impartial if you do. In addition, one other thing, any information of a negative nature that's known about an applicant needs to be brought up during that individual's open interview, being sufficiently specific for the person to have a meaningful opportunity to respond. Now with that, we will try and do this. Justice David Townsend, from afar I know, will you please administer the oath of office to the members of this commission? Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read the entire oath to you all, okay? So keep your mics off. I'll read the full oath, and at the end, if you can each affirm. You should have your oath in your packets. We'll need you to sign that and return it to Beverly. Is that all right, Dean?
Yes, that's perfect. And then we'll coordinate getting it to Beverly afterwards, either with people from afar, maybe sending it by email or something. She will collect the ones who are here in person.
Okay, I'll read you the full oath. Raise your right hand, please. I state your name, solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution and laws of the state of New Mexico, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of the office of Commissioner for the 11th Judicial District Nominating Commission, on which I'm about to enter, to the best of my ability. I so swear, David Thompson.
Okay, so everybody swear.
I so swear.
I so swear, and then sign your. I so
swear, Kristin.
I so swear. All right, so Beverly's going to pick up the forms from the people who are here physically. By the way, should any commissioner want, I've got here disinfectant wipes if you want, feel free to grab one under these circumstances, and there is hand sanitizer there if anybody wants any at any point. So where'd they go on the screen?
I don't know.
Oh, gosh. We have audio?
Do we have audio? Any of the commissioners on the screen?
Can you hear us, Commissioner?
Audio.
We do have audio.
Okay, we can't.
Yes.
Okay, we for some reason can't see. Maybe if we could, Beverly, maybe let the IT folks know, but we will, since we have audio, we can proceed. All right, now we will proceed to introduce ourselves. I will go around the table first, and then I will call out the names of the people remotely. At that point in time, state your name, who indicate the person or entity who appointed you to this commission, as well as if you have any special relationship with any of the applicants, and if you do, if you can be impartial. So we will begin on my right and just go around the table first.
Mitch Burns, attorney in Farmington. I was appointed by the State Bar judges.
And do you have any relationship
No
with?
relationship to either of the applicants.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Bob Rosebrough, an attorney in Gallup, appointed by President Pro Tem Papen. I would like to disclose that applicant David Peterson had, the district attorney's office in McKinley County had a conflict on one case, and Mr. Peterson referred that case to my office, which is being handled by my partner Doug Fowles, and I believe that I can proceed in these hearings with impartiality.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Marianne Armijo, and I was appointed by the governor's office, and I know both the applicants, and I can be impartial in this hearing.
Thank you.
Raymond, Etcitty, attorney, Gallup, appointed by state bar/judges. I think the closest I've known one of them, Mr. Peterson, and we were opening up Fire Rock casinos, discussed the relationship between the tribe and the city.
I can be fair and impartial.
Thank you. Next, we got Gary Risley.
Good morning, Gary Risley, appointed by the State Bar Slant Judges. I know Mr. Peterson. I think we may have actually served on a Judicial Commission many years ago, and I know of him from some work in the legislature, but I don't know him personally to any extent. I can be impartial.
Thank you. Brent Capshaw.
Mr. Attorney. Oh, my speaker went weird. Brent Capshaw, I'm in the District Attorney's Office in Farmington. I believe I was appointed by Chief Judge Karen Townsend. I have no prior knowledge whatsoever of either applicant.
Great, thank you. Next, Jennifer Brickell. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Jennifer Brickell, appointed by the State Bar and Judges. I know neither applicant can be fair and impartial.
Thank you. Justice David Thompson.
Good morning, David Thompson. I was appointed by Chief Justice Judith Nakamura. I do not know the first applicant. Mr. Peterson and I overlapped at the New Mexico Attorney General's office. I do not know him personally, nor do I socialize with him. That's the extent of my knowledge of him. I can be fair and impartial.
Thank you. Judge Christina Bogardis.
Good morning. I'm Christina Bogardis. I was appointed by Chief Judge Miles Hannessy. I'm familiar with Ms. Padilla. We were law school classmates. I can be fair and impartial today.
Thank you. Thomas Lynn Isaacson.
I'm Lynn Isaacson, Gallup attorney. With regard to Mr. Peterson, he and I have attended church together and served on the church council together. I coached his daughter in rec and travel soccer. While he was the city attorney, I served as a contract city attorney and worked with him. With regard to Ms. Gasbridge Padilla, I appeared in probably thousands of cases before her when she was a municipal court judge, and shortly after she left the bench, I employed her to do some research and writing for me. I can be impartial.
Thank you. Billy Keeler.
Hi, this is Bill Keeler. I was appointed by Speaker Egolf. I appeared before Linda Padilla when she was the city judge, and I worked with R. David Peterson when he was the city attorney on some projects for the local football league, and I can be impartial.
Thank you. And Gertrude Lee.
I was appointed by State Bar and Judges. I know Mr. Peterson. He was my supervisor when I worked at the District Attorney's Office in Gallup. I don't know Ms. Padilla personally. I do know her through reputation in her time as a judge, and then also the work that she did for the Catholic Church.
Great, thank you. So we do have
I can be fair and impartial.
Thank you. We do have a quorum. The next item of business, yes.
I forgot to just say that.
Yes.
I also have a relationship with David R. Peterson through the Democratic Party. I forgot
And you
that
feel like
too.
you can be impartial?
I can still be impartial.
Thank you. All right, the next item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Now, upon conclusion of the interviews, one thing to note about the agenda is it will be the commission's decision after the interviews by motion and vote whether to hold a discussion of the candidates in closed or open session. So for now, we're not deciding that. We're just deciding of the general framework agenda of the order that we will proceed. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda, which has been included in your materials?
Mr. Chair, I move we adopt the agenda as stated.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposition? Any abstentions? All right, the agenda is adopted. Now, we are meeting, we begin with the chair's report. We are meeting to recommend applicants to Governor Mitchel and Grisham to fill the vacancy in the 11th Judicial District Court caused by the resignation of the Honorable Judge Lyndy D. Bennett, which was effective February 29th, 2020. On February 6, 2020, my office began taking the following steps in actively soliciting applications for this vacancy. First, we sent notification in the form of a press release which included instructions for obtaining an application and the application deadline of Monday, March 16th at 5 p.m. to the Associated Press, Newswire Services, Albuquerque Business First, the Aztec Local News, Cibola Beacon Grants, Gallup Independent, and the Farmington Daily Times. We also posted notification on the Judicial Selection website. We sent notice to the New Mexico State Bar, which sent notification and application procedures to each member of the state bar residing in the state. Is that like a delay in my voice?
Yeah.
So I'll try and speak a little more slowly. My office also posted notice of the vacancy and application procedures on UNM School of Law's alumni job posting service. An email notification was sent to all law school alumni meeting the statutory qualifications. In addition, notification was sent to the following voluntary bar associations, and I'll read this list. The Bar Association of the U.S. District for the District of New Mexico, the Cibola County Bar Association, the District Judges Association of New Mexico, Inc., the First Judicial District Bar Association, the McKinley County Bar Association, the Navajo Nation Bar Association, the New Mexico Black Lawyers Association, the New Mexico Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, the New Mexico Defense Lawyers Association, the New Mexico District Attorneys Association, New Mexico Hispanic Bar Association, New Mexico Indian Bar Association, New Mexico Chapter of the Federal Bar Association, New Mexico Magistrate Judges Association, New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association, New Mexico Women's Bar Association, New Mexico Lesbian and Gay Lawyers Association, New Mexico Association of Counties Probate Judges Affiliate, Sandoval County Bar Association, and finally the San Juan County Bar Association. In addition, we requested that members of the nominating commission appointed prior to the application deadline make every effort to identify qualified applicants and place telephone calls to encourage them to apply. After the application deadline expired, a news release was issued March 16th announcing the names of the 2 applicants for the position and the date of this commission meeting. On March 16th, my office also sent the name of the applicants to the Chief Disciplinary Counsel to determine whether the applicants had received disciplinary charges. The Chief Disciplinary Counsel's response came in a letter dated March 17th and indicated that the applicants had not been subject to formal disciplinary charges or received any discipline, public or private. In addition, March 16th, my office contacted the Chief Clerk of the Supreme Court of New Mexico to inquire whether the applicants had ever received discipline by the Supreme Court and whether the applicants had ever been the subject of formal disciplinary charges. The Chief Clerk's response came on March 20th, which indicated that no formal discipline by the New Mexico Supreme Court has been filed against the applicants. On March 16th, my office also sent the name of one of the applicants, Linda Gasparic Padilla, to the chair of the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission to inquire whether she'd ever received discipline by the State of New Mexico Judicial Standards Commission. And a letter dated March 25th indicated that no formal discipline by the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission had been filed against her. The applicants and the commission received notice of this meeting, an agenda, the names of the applicants, an interview schedule, and information about the interview process, a copy of the statutory qualifications, and a copy of the rules governing judicial selection commissions. In addition, each commissioner received the completed application submitted by the applicants. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 35 of the New Mexico Constitution, this commission must send the names of the nominees to fill this position to the governor within 30 days of the occurrence of the actual vacancy. Since this vacancy will exist as of March 1st, the commission must send names to the governor by March 30th, 2020. What I typically do is make a phone call and let the governor know right after this meeting is over. So what do you consider as the evaluative criteria when you're reviewing the candidates sitting here on this commission? The following criteria can be found in the rules governing judicial selection commission. So these are the kind of things where when you ask questions, your questions should focus on these things. Physical and mental ability to perform the tasks required, impartiality, industry, integrity, professional skills, community involvement, social awareness, collegiality, writing ability, decisiveness, judicial temperament, and speaking ability. Now, these criteria come from the Handbook for Judicial Nominating Commissions, and they're in addition to the bare statutory qualifications. You should use these criteria, though, to guide your questioning and your decisions of who you'd want to send as names to the governor. Now, the next item on the agenda is the adoption of the interview schedule. The times will probably be a little delayed from where it was originally set up due to some of our technology, but applicants will each be presented in this order and each be given the 30-minute time slot for questions. So is there a motion to adopt the proposed schedule?
I move we adopt the proposed schedule.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those opposed? Say nay. And any abstentions? All right, so this interview schedule is adopted. So the way this will work, and this is an unusual one, I'm doing this for the first time, so I think what I will do with the first candidate, I will first go around the table starting on my right. When I get all the way around the table, then I will proceed to read the names of the people who are remotely here, starting with Victor Titus and going in the same order that I went before. And then for the second candidate, I'll begin on my left and go around the table, and then I will read the names up on the screen, beginning with Gertrude Lee, and I will go in a reverse order through those names to get through everybody's names. So, is that a question?
Mr. Chairman, yes, Gary Risley. We're still getting a lot of feedback, but I think somebody must not have their microphone muted, possibly the speakerphone.
Yep.
I think it's what's creating the...
It would help if anybody who is not speaking, if you could turn off your mic as you're listening to prevent feedback. Chad said the same thing? Okay. Does that include the ones at the table? Should people be pressing? Is there a button for... There is a button. I don't know.
No, that's just for the speakers. That's for the speakers in here. No.
Okay.
It's just
thanks.
there.
All right, yeah, so if you're sitting there on the screen, I guess, if you could turn off your mic until called on to speak.
And to turn down your speakers, because they're really loud. That's what's on the remote.
Oh, and...
Remote people.
Okay. All right, let's give that a try. So we have a limited amount of time with each candidate. We only have 30 minutes with each candidate. I would like the commissioners to ask hard and probing questions if you have one, but given kind of the technological aspects of this and the limited time we have, I would urge you to cede your time if a question that you've been thinking of asking has already been asked, or if it was answered in an opening statement. I will ask commissioners, what we'll do is have every commissioner ask one question. My goal is, at a minimum, to let every commissioner ask one question. We have 30 minutes with each candidate. The way it will work in general is I give them the opportunity at the beginning. They don't have to, but they're welcome to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. After that, we begin the questioning. we have a total time, including that 5 minutes, of 30 minutes with each candidate. I want to, within that 30 minutes, get through all the commissioners asking at least one question. If there's time left at the end, then there could be follow-up questions. And I would just ask people to speak up if they have a follow-up question. Let's see. Oh, any letters of recommendation which were received prior to the scanning of the application were included with the application. Letters received after that point were scanned and sent to commissioners by email on Friday, but in case somebody didn't see that who's sitting around this table, I have them in this envelope, which I will also pass around for at least for people here to see, but you should all have seen those. They should have been scanned and emailed to you. Now we're ready for the public participation component of it. We don't have a lot of people here, not surprisingly, under the current circumstances. But it would be a time now I'm talking to you all sitting out there, if anybody has anything that they would like to say about either of the applicants, just raise your hand. I would ask you to stand up, state your name, and say anything you'd like to say at this point. Oh. All right, so we have no comments from the public, so we will now proceed to interview the applicants as scheduled. The way this will work, the first applicant is Linda Padilla. Well, I would ask the second applicant, Mr. Peterson, to step out of the room while she is doing her interview. She can stay after the completion of her interview. We just don't like anybody to have a preview of what questions might be asked. Any friend or family member of Mr. Peterson who's here cannot go out, can stay in the room, but can't go out and tell him anything about the interview questions at this point. So with that, we will begin, and I will call Ms. Padilla up to the front here. Yes?
Chad asked if you, when you move back, it's better to hear you.
It's better?
Yes.
Okay. I'll push this farther away from me. I am loud is what it is. That's what he's gently saying. All right, so let's begin. Let me write down the time to make sure you've got your full time here. So as I've said, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we're doing this under really unusual circumstances, but we have, as I said, up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, should you choose to make one, and then we'll begin with the questioning around the table. And you don't have to make an opening statement, but you're welcome to, and if you'd like to, the floor is now yours.
All right, thank you. I will keep it very brief. I just want to thank all of you for being here, taking time to set this up in the way that it's been set up to protect us all with our social distancing and our health issues that we're dealing with. So I really appreciate, under these circumstances, everybody's commitment to filling this position in spite of the challenges that we're all facing.
Lost audio.
Is it because I'm not close enough to the mic? No.
That's on.
Yeah.
Right again. Can you hear us now?
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
Oh, I can.
Okay.
Was that a yes?
Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. That having been said, if I appear a little bit like a St. Bernard puppy on his first walk to the dog park, it's because I've been on teleworking and social isolation for the last 18 days, and so I'm just really excited to be among people. Let me tell you a little bit about my resume. I started adult life as a teacher. My bachelor's is in elementary education. I did that for a few years and decided it really wasn't the field for me, so I went to law school. Was the assistant city attorney and city prosecutor for the city of Gallup for a couple of years until a judge retired. And I meant to take that job just as a stopgap until the next election and somebody else could be appointed. Found out that I loved it, that I was better suited to doing that job than I was to prosecuting cases. And so I stayed there for 23 years until I lost an election. And then when I lost the election, my son's school also lost their principal and was in danger of closing for probably the dozenth time in its history. And so I stepped up to do that. Again, fell in love with it, stayed 5 years. My sabbatical year turned into a sabbatical 5 years. And then this job opened up that I'm in now with the Judicial District, and gave me the opportunity to come back into the law, refreshed and renewed, and more in touch with my community than I had been sitting on the bench, and better able to understand some of the things that people in our community deal with on a daily basis that we kind of forget about when we're involved in the adversarial process. This is a last resort for people. It's not a way of life as it is for us lawyers. And so it gave me a chance to reconnect with that, and I feel like I am better able to do what I do because of the time that I spent doing that. And that's my opening statement.
Thank you very much. And we'll begin on my right with Mr. Burns with questions.
Ms. Padilla, Mitch Burns, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
So, I'm curious about the non-disciplinary action that was taken against you as a judge, as municipal judge. You know, if you could explain to the commission what occurred and why your involvement in that shouldn't preclude you from being, your name being sent up to the governor.
Thank you for asking that question and giving me the opportunity to respond to it. The case began with a filing before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, after a hearing, refused to remove me from the bench. 8 months and $13,000 later, in attorney's fees, I agreed to informal discipline. But what occurred was this. A defendant called the court and said, I need to talk to the judge. I missed court and I need to reschedule. As we all know, a scheduling matter is a matter that ex parte communication is allowed for. So I took the call. When I received the call, it turned out that the gentleman was in South Dakota and was being held in a police station and not allowed to drive because his license was suspended. He said, look, I forgot about the ticket. I want to plead guilty to it and pay it. Can you release the suspension on my license? And I said, well, I can't release the suspension on your license until it's paid. He said, I will send my brother or an employee to pay it, but will you please take my guilty plea and let me get on with this? And it is not something that I normally would have done, but there are cases that are exceptions in our line of work that sometimes we see somebody has a need and we can deal with it rather than strictly adhering to the rules. And that's what I did. I took his guilty plea. I think 30 minutes later, someone came in and paid the fine. And when the fine had been paid, then the license suspension was issued. I am confident that had this gone forward to the Judicial Standards Commission, that they would have seen it in the same manner that the Supreme Court did. But I could not afford, at that time I was pregnant, and this was having an impact on my life that was detrimental. It was more expeditious, easier to accept the informal reprimand and move on with my life. It was an error in judgment. I don't deny that. But would I do it again? I would find a way to help people. That's what judges do. That's what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonda, my question is, do you have enough experience in civil practice to serve on the bench?
I don't have a ton of experience in civil practice, but what I do have a ton of experience in is researching and writing and listening to lawyers. And I believe that I have enough experience to, I know the rules of civil procedure. have spent a lot of time in the past few months working for the judges here in the 11th, that I've seen a lot more cases and written a lot of advice to my judges about cases, that I believe I do have the skills that it takes to proceed in a civil practice.
Thank you.
My question to you, Linda, is around community involvement. In the last 10 years, what have you done as far as your community is concerned?
The major thing that I've done has been involved with Sacred Heart School. Being a principal is a lot more time-consuming than I would have believed in the past. It's also sports with my kids. My son is now 13 years old, and he's into soccer. So I've been involved in soccer, and I've been involved in Minecraft clubs and various things through the school, putting on community dances and parties and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Thank you. How has your education background helped you in being a judge?
I like to say that lawyers and kids are a lot alike. Sometimes on the bench you find yourself employing a lot of the skills that a teacher employs in a classroom, in keeping order in the courtroom, keeping lawyers on task, keeping litigants on task, and moving things along. So I've found that a lot of those skills that I have honed as an educator have come in very, very handy on the bench.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you how your experience being a principal would help you being a judge. And I think you've just touched on that, so I won't ask you that. What do you find most difficult about following your oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, if anything?
Well, that's a tough question. I think that the question that Mr. Burns asked earlier, and that situation informs everything that I do. There's a little voice in the back of my head that always questions, how's this going to look in the newspaper? And I think that is the toughest part of being a judge, is putting that aside to the point that your justice comes first, doing what's right comes first, but the details are also important. And so blending all of that together is the difficult thing for me.
Thank you. Now I'll read off names of commissioners appearing virtually to ask questions. Victor Titus, do you have a question? Victor Titus?
I bet he put it on mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Get my mic. Good morning. As I go through the application, Mrs. Padilla, I see almost 30 years in the legal community, but not one jury trial. And I want you to speak to, if I had to have my appendix out, I'm not sure I'd want to have a doctor that had seen a video and read a book about it, but had never done it. Tell me why, if I have a major piece of litigation involving hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, I would want to have you to be the first jury trial in that case.
That's true. I have not ever presided over a jury trial or participated in one, except as a juror. I have been involved in jury trials here since I've been at the 11th. Jury trial issues come up all the time, and judges need immediate answers. And so those are the kinds of things that, as legal counsel, I've worked on. It's an area of experience that I am somewhat lacking. You know, I can't sugarcoat it. But as any attorney, I know how to read the rules. I know how to preside over a case. I know how to move things along. That's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you. Next, we got on speakerphone, George Munoz. Louder. Hold on a second, the volume's low. When,
That's as high as I can get it.
is it on speaker?
On speaker.
No, hold on.
Hello?
Can you hear us now? George?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. I had you guys muted and then I had a headset on. I guess my main concern is we need good judges right now, and our courts are jam-packed. Are you willing to put that extra time as a district judge with the backlog and the amount of cases that are in the court right now?
Yes, absolutely. And not only do we have a backlog, but we're going to have more of a backlog when we finally come out of this pandemic situation because of all of the cases that we've postponed out of necessity. And so when I was in the municipal court, my caseload was about 5,000 cases a year. I am an expert at moving cases along. One of the things that I did while I was municipal judge was help train other municipal judges in how to move a docket and keep it going while making sure that every litigant was heard and afforded the opportunity to get their case really, well vetted by the court. So yes, that's something that I'm very committed to doing.
Thank you. Next up, if you have questions, Kristin Harrington.
Hi. To what degree of exposure have you had with domestic cases?
When I first began on the bench, well, even before that, as city prosecutor for the city of Gallup, and in the early years that I was on the bench, domestic violence was filed in municipal court as well as magistrate court. And so in those maybe 5 or 6 years before it was made a misdemeanor instead of a petty misdemeanor, we handled, I'd say, roughly 1,000 cases a year in municipal court. So my experience with that has been extensive.
Thank you. Let's see, next we have Stephen Murphy.
Ms. Padilla, my question is this: how many paying clients have you ever represented in a civil case, a domestic case, a personal injury case, and a criminal case?
Well, I've never been, thank you. I've never been a plaintiff's lawyer, but in my time as assistant city attorney for the city of Gallup, the attorney at that time, Jim Parmalee, was sick when I was hired, and never really was able to practice for those 2 or 3 years that I was there. And so I handled those cases for the city. Some of them went to risk management, some of them went to contract attorneys, but there were many cases that I handled myself in the city attorney's office.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't think that answers my question. Have you ever had a paying client that you've represented in court?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Gary Risley.
Good morning, this is Gary Risley. To follow up on a little bit with Mr. Murphy, so I understand you have not ever engaged in private practice. Have you, to go a little bit, to expand a little bit beyond what we saw previously on another question is, have you handled any civil cases? If so, what type?
I've handled a few cases in magistrate court for the city of Gallup. disputes over right-of-way, the city, gosh, it's been a long time, the city filing debt and money due cases, things of that nature.
That answer your question?
Thank you.
Let's see, next we have Brant Capshaw.
Get it unmuted. Thank you. Both as a prosecutor and many years ago in my days of private practice, I found that my cases lived or died based on evidentiary rulings, admissibility rulings that the trial judge made in jury trials. With your experience, can you alleviate my concern that you may not have a full handle on the rules of evidence right now? And second part of that question would be, if you're in a hearing and you're unsure on whether a piece of evidence ought to come in, do you weigh the odds of what the appellate court might do with it rather than what you think the actual law is?
I'm going to answer the second part of your question first and say no. Worrying about appellate issues is not my go-to. As a municipal judge, all I handled was criminal cases. And yes, I know that the evidentiary issues were not as complex as they are in district court. They were still based on the rules of evidence. And so it was important that I stay up on them at all times. In the months that I've been here at the 11th, evidentiary issues have come up many times that I've had an opportunity to work as an attorney in the background, consulting with my judges about evidentiary issues and helping them to think through different issues that have arisen and how to deal with them. So I'm confident that I have the skills, and I also know how to rely on the information given to me by an attorney and to weigh what the attorneys give me to help me come to a good decision.
Thank you. And next we have Jennifer Brickell.
Good morning. My question is how would your experiences working for the city attorney's office help you in being a judge and hearing the different cases you'll be hearing?
The time that I was with the city attorney's office, I got to see the ordinances being, law being made, the mindset that goes into creating a law, the way that the police department and city departments go about enforcing a law, and it helped informed in a lot of ways the way that I saw as a judge and ruled as a judge on the enforcement actions that came before me, because I had a little bit of that mindset from my time in the city attorney's office. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Next we have Justice Thompson.
Good morning, Ms. Padilla. Thank you for applying. My question is based on paragraph 14 of your application and the Article 6 in the New Mexico Constitution. District courts shall have been in the actual practice of law for at least 6 years preceding assumption of office. I want you to tell us a little bit about your break from legal practice from 2015 to 2019 and how you maintained your understanding and education in all areas of law. Thank you.
Thank you. During my time as a principal, I found myself doing a little bit of legal work for the diocese. in terms of, there's a lot of landlord-tenant issues that come up. There are employment issues that come up. People come to their school principal with a lot of their problems, especially when they know that that principal is a lawyer. And so those kinds of things were always crossing my desk. Of course, during that same time, I made a point, as we all are required to do, of continuing my education. I did take CLE credits and go to seminars and try to keep myself apprised of what was going on in the legal field.
Thank you. Next, we have Judge Bogardus.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your application. I think my question has already been answered, so I'm going to defer to the next person. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next, we have Lynn Isaacson.
Good morning, Linda. One of the criteria we're to look at is a applicant's ability.
It's kind of breaking up there.
You broke up there, Lynn, and I couldn't.
Okay, let me try again. One of the criteria we are to look at is an applicant's decisiveness. Tell us how you make a decision.
Sometimes way too quickly. I weigh the facts in front of me. I listen to what the attorneys tell me. I take every piece of information into consideration, and then I make the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Keeler.
Good morning, Linda. I'm gonna just pitch you a softball question here. Tell us why you'd be a good judge.
Well, I hope I would be a good judge because I know how to listen to people. I know how to make a decision. I've got 23 years of experience as a judge and many years of experience outside of that dealing with legal issues.
Thank you. So we still have about 4 minutes if anybody has any follow-up questions that they would like.
Did we skip Miss Lee, Gertrude Lee?
Did I miss? I'm sorry.
Hi, this is
Sorry.
Gertrude Lee.
Thank you.
I think you might have skipped over me.
I did. All right, your turn. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. You mentioned in your opening, Ms. Padilla, good morning, that you found you were better suited to being a municipal judge than a prosecutor. Can you explain how you were more suited to that work versus prosecution?
Yes, thank you for the question. I just feel like I do a better job weighing both sides of an issue and making a decision than I did in zealously putting forth one side of a position. I was always able to see the other side, and that made me, I think, less of a zealous prosecutor, where my temperament is more weighing issues and weighing the things that are in front of me and then coming to a decision based on both sides of the story.
Thank you. Now we still have then, what is it, a little less than 3 minutes. If anybody has any follow-up questions they would like to ask, now would be the time. You maybe hold your hand up. I can see you on the screen if you have any. No follow-up questions? All right, well, thank you for joining us in this unusual circumstances with video, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome, by the way, to observe our next interview now that yours is complete.
All right, thank you. Thank you all.
morning.
Good morning, Dean.
So we, as you know, we have about 30 minutes with you, and I've built in up to 5 minutes at the beginning for an opening statement, should you choose to make one. You don't have to. But then after that, we will jump to questioning. And I think what we'll do, we'll go in the exact reverse order where we went with the first candidate. So I'll start actually with the people on the screen. I'll start with Ms. Gertrude Lee, and then we'll go through them, and then we'll go around the table. So with that, the floor is yours if you'd like to make an opening statement.
Well, Dan, first of all, I want to thank everyone for participating in this. This is a truly unusual time that we are going through, and a rather disconcerting time for everybody. I know quite a few of you personally. Some of you have known a very long time, and a few of you I don't know very well at all. Those of you who've known me for a long time know that 5 minutes isn't enough time for me to usually clear my throat, so I won't belabor that. I was born and raised in Gallup, went to school here, went to the University of New Mexico for both undergraduate school and law school. My parents owned a general store when I was growing up about 2 blocks away from this courthouse. Peterson Jewelers. My in-laws, my late in-laws, my wife's parents owned Fred's Conoco, which was also about 2 blocks away from this courthouse. Jenny and I came back from UNM in 1978 temporarily. Me as a brand new lawyer and her as a brand new teacher, and here it is 2020, and the temporary port's, I guess, kind of long past. We came back here, we raised our kids here. I have 2 grown kids, a grandchild who lives here now. I guess what I want to say, and I think the reason why I applied, again, I've applied before, I've gone through this process a couple of times before, is that I think what a district court trial judge does, the most important thing that you can be asked to do is preside over trials. And if there's anything I've done in my career, it's been a lot of jury trials, most of them criminal. Last count, about 175 total. And I think the other thing that I bring to the table is that in the 42 years I practiced law, I've done a lot of different kinds of law. My wife's joke is that I change jobs every 3 years, and I told her, well, honey, that's not right. I've been a lawyer for 42 years. And she said, oh, well, look back, you've changed jobs about 13 times, and that's actually pretty close to how it works. The other reason that I applied is that I want to have another opportunity, like I had when I served the 8 years I did in the legislature, to provide some public service to my hometown, to my community, and to perhaps have a broader impact on the welfare of the community than you can have as an individual lawyer. That's kind of why I spent 8 years in the legislature, and would now like to spend some time on the bench. It's the only aspect of the law that I really haven't done. I haven't been a judge before. I think that a person needs to be knowledgeable about their community, and I think that is something that I've developed over living here my entire life. I appreciate the wonderful cultural diversity that we have here. I've known Linda Padilla before she was a Padilla, ever since she's been a lawyer. I appeared in front of her as a municipal judge. Known her family for pretty much my whole life. And she's a very good lawyer and was a very fine municipal judge. I'd just like to have an opportunity to, and I don't say end my career, but because I don't know how long that's going to last, but I would like to fulfill my career by serving as a local district judge. So I'll stand for questions, Dean. Thank you.
So as I said, we'll begin the questioning in the reverse order of the last round of questioning. So with that, we will begin with Ms. Gertrude Lee for the first question. I think you're on mute. Gertrude.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So you have had a lot of experiences in your time as an attorney. Can you explain what your most difficult job has been and how that experience will help you to be a good judge in the 11th Judicial District?
Gerb, thank you for that question. I think probably the toughest things that I've had to handle have been on both sides of the criminal law, both as a criminal defense attorney and as a prosecutor. And simply because you have in that area a huge impact on what happens to people, good or bad. And I think it's trying to fulfill the role that you have and to realize that as an advocate, you have a role to play. Our legal system's an adversarial system. It's not an enemy system. We don't have enemies. We have adversaries and opponents. I've always strived to try to treat the people I've dealt with the same kind of dignity and respect that I would like to have. And I don't shrink from making hard decisions. And I think that is something that I would bring to the bench. I'm not unwilling or reluctant to make a hard decision.
Thank you. Next, hey Beverly, is that Beverly's phone?
No.
That's yours?
It's the, I don't know what George is doing, what we're doing here.
See if he's still on.
Okay.
Okay. Next, we have Bill Keeler, please.
Good morning, Our David.
Hi, Bill.
What's the biggest weakness you'll need to overcome to be a good judge?
I think it's something that when you practiced for a long time, like I have, Bill, is the idea that I already know everything. And maybe that's one of the nicest things about practicing law. The law is dynamic. It changes every day. And maybe that's the thing that keeps you energized and excited about it. No matter how long you've practiced, nobody knows everything. And you're constantly having to learn. I kind of like doing that. So I hope I can overcome the idea that I'm, just because I put on a black robe, that all of a sudden I know everything and that I'm the end-all and be-all. I just want to try to be fair to everybody, to work hard, and to be considerate.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Lynn Isaacson.
Good morning, Dave.
Hi.
You bring an impressive jury trial list of experience with you. How would you step back and let lawyers try the case if you were on the bench instead of being in the trenches?
You know, I think that's a very significant question. Sometimes we use this analogy, and I think it's overworked, about trial judges being sort of like the baseball umpire. I don't think that's really true on it, because there's much more for you to do. But I think what I've learned over the 42 years of practicing is that the function of a judge is to make sure that the process is done in an orderly way, that everybody follows the rules. And I've always liked it when judges let me as a litigator try my case. I think that's what you have to do. You can't help somebody, one side or the other, try their case. You have to let them try it. And I would hope that I've had enough experience doing that so that if I become a judge, that I will indeed allow the lawyers to try their cases.
Thank you. Next, we have Judge Bogardus.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Thank you so much for your application. It was really impressive, your breadth of experience. is incredible. In reading through your letters of recommendation, one of the phrases that popped out to me is that you were well-versed in the challenges and barriers to people in your community, to the law. And my question is, I want you to describe your view of some of those challenges and discuss how you might deal with them as a district court judge.
Judge Bogartis, thank you. I think McKinley County is somewhat unique amongst New Mexico counties. We have a very large minority population, a very large Native American population, and we're also a very high poverty county. Those things create barriers. We have people who are not familiar with the legal process, who don't have access to private legal advice, and who I think are sometimes deterred by the language barriers and by simple things like transportation to be able to participate. I think one of the best things that we did many years ago to improve the quality of justice was when we made translators available to jurors so that people who are not primarily English speakers could participate. I think you just have to be cognizant of your community, of the cultural traditions, and of the problems that they face. You want to treat everyone that comes into court with dignity and respect, and to not create artificial barriers for them to use the legal system.
Thank you. Next, we have Justice Thompson.
Morning, Mr. Peterson. Thank you for your application. My question is about docket management. If you are to take the bench, you will inherit a docket from your predecessor, and you could be obligated to operate under unique circumstances given the pandemic. Give me concrete examples and procedures you would implement to ensure that your civil, criminal, and domestic relations docket continues to move forward as long as the courts are open. Thank you.
Justice Thompson, I think it's incumbent upon us to try to bring as much, for lack of a better word, normalcy to what goes on in these trying times. And I think one of the things that we can do is to take advantage of technology. It's something that we're doing here to try to limit the amount of travel that we have to require people to do. I've become a big fan of scheduling orders. I don't think you should be overly rigid about that, but I think part of the role of the district judge is to set those timelines and guidelines for attorneys. I think there's always room for flexibility, and there should be, but that's the best thing that I can think of that we can do. And we do need, because I realize that there's a likelihood that I will be having to take care of cases in San Juan County. We have great physical distances here, and the only real way we can overcome it, because we can't bring Farmington and Aztec closer to Gallup or vice versa, is through what we're doing here, to try to use technology to expedite things as much as we can.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer Brickell.
I have no questions for this candidate.
Thank you. Brent Capshaw.
Thank you. Good morning. You spend a lot of time in front of judges. What do you find most irritating, and what will you do different?
But I think you've tried a lot of cases like I have. I think probably the hardest thing for a judge is to be almost infinitely patient because the worst thing that a lawyer can do in front of a judge is to waste their time. And it's easy to get annoyed over that. I think you try to deal with it with some humor, and I always have tried to take my job very seriously. I try to take myself not too seriously, but you need to fight against that, and perhaps maybe that's one of the advantages, and maybe the only advantage of getting older is I think it does improve one's ability to be patient and tolerant, and yet still make sure that the process goes forward.
Thank you. Gary Risley.
Good morning, from Farmington. I understand the vast majority of your experience has been in the criminal docket side. Could you elaborate for us the types of civil cases you may have handled in the past, or civil matters you've had in the past, and give us some details of the number or amount that you've handled?
Sure, Mr. Risley. Early on in my career, I worked for a small law firm here, Schulke, Wolf & Rich, and it was sort of a generalized private civil practice. I did pretty much everything. They did some government stuff. We did domestic relations. We did contract work. We did probate work. Later on, I worked as a bank attorney, and I probably learned more in the couple of years that I worked for First Interstate Bank than I ever did in law school about Article 2 and Article 3 and Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. So there's some practicalities in that. When I was in private practice, especially when I was in solo practice, you do a little bit of everything. Did a lot of domestic relations work, and a lot of personal injury work, mostly plaintiff's work. Later as a city attorney, I was sort of on the other side, defending civil claims and taking care of employment issues. So I think I have had, the last part of my career has concentrated more on criminal work, both prosecution and defense, that I've had a wide array of experiences with almost every kind of civil case that can come in front of you. And I also try to keep current on what's happening in the law, not just in criminal law. I'm one of those people who reads the Bar Bulletin every time it comes out. I hate to admit that, but I do, and I still find it interesting to follow legal trends and new things. And being a former legislator, I'm kind of a junkie about when the legislature makes changes in the law, not just criminal law, but civil law too. So I would hope I could bring all of that to the table.
Thank you. Next question, Stephen Murphy.
Hey, good morning, Dave.
The
question is, if you were elected a judge or appointed as a judge down in Gallup, will you travel to Farmington to hear cases that you're assigned to?
Steve, I think that's a very good question, and I've been practiced here my whole career, and the two counties when we had a lot fewer judges, the judges still had to do that, and I think it's really important. When you have a relatively small bar and a small number of judges, there are going to be times when people either recuse themselves or get excused. And many times, you need to bring in a judge from out of town. I've done a lot of traveling in the past. I did a lot as an attorney. I think it's important for the judges of the whole district to be ready, willing, and able to come to the other county to help out whenever they're needed. And I realize that because I'm kind of taking over a docket and because of my current position with the DA's office here in Gallup, that I may indeed receive quite a few cases from San Juan County. I'm ready, willing, and able to go there. I think it's easier for a single judge to travel someplace than to bring a whole bunch of litigants and witnesses and things like that to a foreign place.
Thank you. Kristin Harrington.
Good morning. What kind of qualities do you think that a judge must possess in order to preside over domestic relations cases?
I think those cases are particularly heartrending because they involve family relationships, close emotional bonds. I think, once again, those kinds of cases are put at a premium that a judge be patient, that you be a good listener, and quite honestly, and maybe it's not a word we use much in court, but kind. These are people who are dealing with sometimes fractured personal family relationships, and they're very trying situations. So I would hope that I would bring those kinds of aspects to taking care of those kinds of cases.
Thank you. George Munoz, Mr. Munoz, can you hear us?
George.
Yeah, I'm here. You guys hear me?
Yes.
I guess, Mr. Peterson, with your experience and interaction, widely through the community with the DAs and having been an attorney before, how are you going to handle the amount of recusals you may have due to your wide experience and where you practice with the backlog in our court system? And that could even get worse with this new pandemic we have.
Senator Munoz, I think that's a highly appropriate question for anybody who's new, who's coming onto the bench, and who's been present in a community for a long time, especially if you've been an active practitioner. I think it's important that litigants feel comfortable that whoever the judge is indeed going to be fair and impartial. I will not seek to recuse myself without what I think is good cause. I would have to do that on a case-by-case basis. But I think you have to be willing to try cases. I think judges are human beings. We bring our life experience, our personal relationships into the courtroom with us. But the thing that's different in this job as a judge is that you have to set all of that aside. You set aside all of your preconceived notions, all of your personal biases, whatever they are, pro or con, because you owe ultimate fidelity to the law. And the law, we're a country of with the rule of law, and you must be fair and impartial to everyone that comes in, and I don't think you should avoid cases just because they make you feel uncomfortable.
Thank you. Next question from Victor Titus.
Good morning, David. It's been a long time.
Hi, Vic.
Wish you well, and I have no questions for you today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll continue around the table here with Judge DePauli.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Thanks for your application. You've been at the business of the law for over 40 years. You've sworn an oath that whole time. I've found as a judge, sometimes that oath is difficult to follow. It can make for hard decisions. How do you ensure to us that when you have that hard decision in front of you, you'll follow that oath?
Just, Paulie, you've now been on the bench for quite a few years, and you realize that a lot of the things that come in front of you are not easy. If they were easy, the people that were in front of you would have probably already settled all of them. I take that oath of office to treat everyone who comes in front of me with fairness and impartiality very seriously. You know, that famous statue that we have, justice is blind, means that justice doesn't look at the differences amongst the people that are there, but also justice is not deaf and mute. There is participation and byplay in it. I think you have to, every time a case comes in front of you, make sure internally that you are being honest and fair and impartial to everyone who's in your court, and to treat everyone with the dignity and respect that we all show people when we become judges. That's why we wear black robes and everybody stands up when you come in the room and everybody calls you Your Honor. Well, those shouldn't be just words, but it's a two-way street. And I would hope that, and one of the things that I guess was maybe feel very happy about going through this application process is that, you know, you're supposed to get some letters from people who you opposed in court. And quite honestly, some of the kindest letters I got were from the people that I went hammer and tong with.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question goes back to the beginning. I sort of see that your application at UNM, Bachelor's University Studies, and you started law school. Why did you start the legal, why back then did you start the legal profession? Why did you start this career?
Well, Mr. Wesley, thanks. I appreciate that. It's kind of interesting. Back when I was younger, I was kind of a science math geek. That was before we even had a term for that. I had a cousin, an older cousin, who was a physicist. And round about junior high school, it dawned on me that I couldn't open a physics store in Gallup, New Mexico. And so I thought, well, what else do you like? Well, I always was interested in history and politics. And so kind of from junior high school on, that's where I headed. And indeed, I'm kind of atypical for my law school class. I indeed went straight out of high school into undergraduate school, and straight from undergraduate school into law school, and straight into practicing law. I started practicing law at the grand old age of 23. So I guess it was just one of those things where early on it fascinated me. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I've had the opportunity now to come back and apply this profession for over 40 years, and one of the things that I still find exciting about it is that it's a dynamic process. The law changes every day, and that kind of keeps you fresh.
Thank you.
David, what are some of the ways that you've given back to your community, being such a, you're a longtime resident?
Mary Ann, thanks. I've always tried to be involved in the community. Len Isaacson mentioned that he and I were on the church council, a little Trinity Lutheran church here for many years. Len was my daughter's soccer coach. I've always tried to be active in as many things as I possibly could, Mary Ann. It's one of those things where you try to find different ways to help out with the community. My wife's a career school teacher, and I've always loved education, always been involved in that. Used to help her out even before we had kids in school with those kinds of things. One of the things that I am looking forward to doing, if I get the opportunity, is to pursue the establishment of a veterans court for McKinley County. We're an area of the state that has a huge number of honorably former serving military people. And yet we know veterans, especially in the modern era as science has improved, come back sometimes seriously harmed, not just physically, but otherwise, and that sometimes causes them to run afoul of the law. I think trying to understand that and appreciate that is a good way to deal with those things. A lot of my activities, quite honestly, as an adult, have been in politics. Once again, I kind of enjoyed that, but I also realize that if I get on the bench, I kind of have to leave that maybe not completely behind, because we wouldn't be going through this process if it wasn't tinged with some political issues. But it will be something that I won't be able to be as active in as I was in the past.
Thank you. Mr. Rosebrough?
David, if you could do one thing over in your practice of law, what would it be?
Wow. This may sound kind of strange, Bob, but, you know, probably the dumbest thing that I did in my career as a legislator was to create a new district judgeship position for McKinley County and forgot to ask my law partner, was he going to put in for the judgeship? And that was Grant Fouts. But I say that tongue-in-cheek. You know, I don't know. You know, I really don't think regret is very helpful. There's just too many different forks in the road to be taken. Where we ended up with is due to a countless number of decisions. Let's suffice it to say that, you know, I think this is a journey, not a destination, and the good and the bad has come with it, but I really can't think of anything I want to change.
Thank you.
So David, I just met you today, and so this question isn't targeted at you, but I also practice in federal court and in Colorado courts, and I believe we're blessed currently in the 11th with the judges we have. But one of my concerns going around into different courts and jurisdictions is arrogance that I think all of us attorneys can see can sometimes creep up, and though someone may be a great down-to-earth lawyer and good person, they get on the bench, and over time even, it can rear its ugly head. So I guess I would like for you to, one, comment on your thoughts on arrogance and how it can come into a judge, as well as what barometer or checks you will have in place to ensure that you don't become overcome with arrogance at some point.
Mitch, thanks. I appreciate that. I think maybe, you know, I put in for judgeships before, and I was quite a bit younger, and some of the criticism was that maybe I was too young. And now I'm kind of getting criticism on the other side that I may be too old and too set in my ways. I hope that's not true. But I think the whole status of being a judge, which lends itself, if you're not on guard against it, of being arrogant. It's the people stand up. They call you your honor when you come into the room. But I think the best way to fight against that is to be well-grounded in your personal life. I've been blessed to be married to the same woman for 45 years and raised a couple of, I think, pretty good adult children and a grandchild. It's remembering that your role as a judge is that. It is a role to be played. And I think maybe the biggest sin that anyone can have is hubris, where you just think you're better than everybody else just because of who you are or what you are. I think you constantly have to fight against that. And once again, it gets back to this point of treating everybody who comes in your court with dignity and respect. And that's not just lawyers. That's witnesses, that's jurors, that's people who wander up to the clerk's window with a problem. And maybe at this stage of my life, I'm less prone to being arrogant because I I hate to say it's maturity, but there is something to be said for putting a lot of miles on yourself. And it's just to try to be aware of that, to not get too full of yourself. Because I don't think that's the proper way to treat people.
Thank you. All right, we are actually out of time, so thank you for spending time with us. And you may stay in the room while we decide what our next step is, how we're going to proceed with deliberations. Thank you. So now, this is going to be completely unusual, so I don't know how this will play out. We now get to the point where we decide how we would like to deliberate. Echoing. I don't know if there's a way. How we would like to deliberate as a commission. Normally, what we do, we have I don't know why that's.
They need to turn mics off.
If y'all can maybe turn mics off there for right now to, anybody who's got a mic on, if you could turn it off. So now we need to decide how to deliberate. The two possible ways to deliberate are either in open session or closed session. The vast majority of these that I see are in closed session, but I've also done these in open session just as well, and we're dealing with an unusual situation. If it's open session, what that means is that everybody stays sitting in the room while we talk and while we vote and everything, and they know exactly how things go. If it's closed session, then we would ask everybody sitting out there, the candidates and anybody from the public, to step out of the room. We would turn off our live stream on YouTube, which people can see, and I would have to ask, I guess, the people in Aztec who are not commissioners to step out of the room as well. If we do go into closed session, we would then have a separate question which we would handle by vote of what level of confidentiality to employ. And that could be complete confidentiality or a limited, more partial version, and I'll explain that if we get to that point. But for right now, what I would need is a motion to proceed either in open or closed session.
Motion to proceed in closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so discussion. This is for anybody. I guess commissioners, I can see you. Maybe if you put up a hand if you have something to say. If you're on the screen or around the tables, anybody have any? No? All right. Ready to vote? Then I guess the vote, those in favor of proceeding in closed session, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No opposition. Any abstentions? All right, so we'll proceed in closed session. So now I would ask the candidates and the members of the public to step outside the courtroom. We'll call you back in for a final vote in open session. In addition, the YouTube stream should be cut, and I'm asking Thank you. All right, so now I would entertain a motion to go back into open session.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor of going back into open session, say aye.
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 Those who are opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we are back in open session now. Is there a motion to be put before this commission?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion.
Yes.
I move that we send the name of the following nominee to Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham for consideration in making an appointment for the vacancy in the 11th Judicial District Court. The nominee is Robert David Peterson.
Is there a second?
I second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? No opposition. Any abstentions? The vote is unanimous. The vote will be recorded in the minutes. Is there any further business before this commission? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Yes. Sorry, there may be further business. Yes.
I want to thank you and Beverly for putting this together and making the accommodations necessary to complete the commission. I want to thank you too for that. That's all.
Conference recording has started.
All righty. Thank you. Thank you. So we do have this recorded separately. We're good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Chairman, so moved.
Second? Second?
I'll second.
Favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you for coming.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.